All right, well, today I have the honor of being able to interview Fred Meyer, who's the owner of Dallas Bonsai Garden. Fred's going to explain to us all about bonsai and really give us an inside view into what a master sees and does when they're looking at bonsai and when they create bonsai. So, Fred, thank you for joining me today.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Oh, no problem. I wanted to start out basically with, every book starts out on the history of bonsai, but I don't really think that we should get into it too much. But I wonder, is there anything that, you think people need to know about the history of bonsai?
My equation for history is one that you can see if you think about it now. If you see Chinese bonsai, pinjing, to me, I don't mean to be critical. Maybe this is not politically correct to say this. To me, they look more like potatoes. They're chunky. They look like a plant that has been tortured quite often.
Okay.
The Japanese plants remind me of a butterfly in that their branches are very small, very delicate, and reminds me of a perfect tree in miniature. Now, this is, of course, because of the way that the Japanese have done it. And recently, the Chinese have copied this in the commercially produced products that we see here in the United States. However, if you look at the big old plants, they're really nothing to me but potted plants. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't some that are very beautiful, but if you want to see beautiful plants, you need to look at the Japanese plants. That's as far as history goes. I think when the Japanese took over this hobby, uh, they perfected it to the utmost. Absolutely beautiful.
Okay. All right. So, do bonsai plants eventually grow so large that they can't be bonsai anymore, or, or do you just,
Yes, I understand what you're
okay.
saying. Back in 1968, we went to see John Naka, and his whole backyard was full of these plants that were 4, 5, 6 foot tall, and of course tokonami pots and all, and absolutely beautiful, but huge, and they were perfectly proportioned. So to say that any plant can't be or outgrows or is too big, no, I don't think so. The Japanese normally, when you see plants, would normally be 1 foot to 2 foot. Yet when we go to Japan in the springtime, we see the azaleas in bloom, and we've seen the sinewy varieties, snake-type shaped ones that are 3 and 4 feet tall, just covered with blossoms. Of course, this is for display and for show. The ones that are, to me, the most beautiful are the 1 to 2 foot sizes. We have also seen a collection over there of thimble type
Mm.
plants. They were no bigger than, say, a half-inch tall out of the pot, and the pot being about the same. So it was an inch, inch and a quarter overall dimensions.
Wow.
Excellent quality, obviously, or this man wouldn't be showing it off, but he had a whole backyard full of these little things, and it was unbelievable. So you can have virtually any size plant. The key to it is how artistic they are, and of course, as I've said previously, the Japanese are experts at this art.
Well, that makes me wonder what exactly is a bonsai? Is it because you're saying it can be tiny and it can be large? What's the characteristics of a bonsai?
A bonsai, the definition of the word is a potted plant, basically, a plant in a pot.
Okay.
Bonsai. The definitions that we as Americans would put on it would be something that would look artistic, not, pardon me, just like a juniper that you buy at the nursery and plop in there just immediately after getting it, or an azalea. Yes, with training and with some judicious pruning and wiring, they can look like a bonsai pretty quickly. But the difference is that a bonsai will look like a miniature tree that you would see, as you said yourself, looking out onto a valley or onto a meadow and see this one beautiful tree perfectly shaped. When we go up and down the streets ourselves, we'll look at plants, and especially big old trees, and see the roots exposed down at the base and the trunk tapering up and then a beautiful canopy. This is what a bonsai looks like. It needs to be artistic. Yes, there are some rules, but quite often the rules are broken because the plant isn't going to cooperate and let you do what you want to do with a particular branch or a particular shape. So you can make any plant, any type of plant, a bonsai by just making it look beautiful or trying to imitate nature in miniature.
Okay, Fred, so do the bonsai get bigger and bigger, or do you aim to keep them the same size forever? Do you keep them in the same pot forever?
Most people, when they have a plant, will buy a very young plant and grow it on to a particular size. Most Americans are in the 12 to 16, 18-inch size. Most Americans want their plants to be in that size. So they will grow them up to that point and then keep pruning and keep pruning. And what happens in a pot, it will take about 7 years in this pot to equal 1 year in the ground as far as growth. So it takes a long while to do it in the pot. But if you keep judiciously pruning this plant, you will have within a few years, 4 or 5 years, a beautiful little bonsai. We have plants that are over 75 years old. We got them over 40 years ago, and they're the same height as when we got them, roughly 2.5 feet tall, and the spread of the head is about 2.5 feet wide. They're maple trees, Japanese maples, and we have some pines. And they're basically the same size as when we got them. All we're trying to do is to keep them in health, keep them basically the same size. Yes, the trunk goes bigger and bigger and bigger, and the exposed roots gets more beautiful and more beautiful. So it can be in the same size forever. When we go and see the fantastic selection of plants in Japan, these plants can be 100, 200, up to 1,000 years old, and they're all less, or 2 feet or less, say, and absolutely beautiful. This is a left-handed slap, but they look nearly artificial because they're so perfect.
Wow. So keeping them the same size won't eventually make them look like, as you said about the Chinese trees, like a potato?
No.
No, okay.
Because you're doing the root pruning every 3 years, every 5 years, which we'll talk about a little later in the root pruning session.
Okay.
But no, by pruning the roots, you're giving this old plant a new lease on life. It will be able to generate new roots, which will generate new growth for the plant, but it'll stay basically the same size.
Okay.
By bottom pruning and top pruning.
Well, that makes me wonder, how do you find a bonsai? Well, I know that there's like different ways of propagating. You can propagate from seed, but one of the ways people typically would create a bonsai is by finding a nursery plant, wouldn't you say?
Yes, and that's how we used to do it too. We'd go to every little nursery around and scour and look underneath the canopy of the plant, the junipers, to try to get a single trunk, or say an azalea, a single trunk, or a pyracantha, a single trunk, and then work from it from there. And yes, it takes time, but that's the fun of the hobby. is being able to create a plant that you can call yours, even though it may be 3 or 4 years old at the time you purchased it. It's still your baby because you're going to prune it and wire it and shape it the way you want. And within, again, 2, 3, 4 years, it will look so different you won't even realize that it was out of a 1-gallon nursery can or a 2-gallon nursery can.
So the process of creating a bonsai from nursery stock to a finished bonsai, you would say, would be around 4 years?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And how long?
Let me qualify that now.
Okay.
A bonsai is normally never finished. You're always pruning a little bit here and pruning a little bit there. And even when you go see these masterpieces in Japan, these men that have created these will say, oh, well, we need a little bit more of something over here or a little bit more foliage over there, or we need to train this. In other words, they're constantly trying to make it, quote unquote, more perfect. But for us, as an America hobby, we just want to enjoy them. And yes, in 3 to 5 years, you're going to have a nice, beautiful bonsai that you can call your own and have a good time with.
Oh, okay. Well, see, for me, sometimes I think of becoming like a bonsai master is almost like becoming the Buddha. It's like reaching enlightenment. And I just wonder if it's possible in this lifetime, for the average Joe to do it. Or do you think that, first off, is it possible for a beginner to become a master? But if so, what's the most direct route, do you think?
To become a master, I feel should not be the goal of most American people. They should want to know some of the rules, and they want to know some of the rules that they need to bend or to skip so that they can enjoy this as a hobby. One of the books that I remember reading in high school was How to Ride Your Hobby. Mm-hmm. And it's important that the hobbyist understands what the rules are and that he should enjoy the rules, but the rules are sometimes broken, and that to be a master just comes with time and with artistry. There are a lot of people that can be in bonsai but are not artists, and they will not be a bonsai master. We see people, and I won't quote names here, that can spout off reams of information like a recording machine with all types of information, but that doesn't mean that they're good at what they're talking about. We've seen that at some of the clubs up in northern Minnesota and in Wisconsin. So it's important for the hobby person, an American hobbyist, to understand that they need to know some of the rules, like what's in John Naka's books, and use them. And sometimes they can't use them, but to enjoy whatever they're doing. This is not something that is like a religion and that you have to every morning recite a ritual. It's to enjoy it.
Okay, so you're saying that there is a right way to create a bonsai, but there's not a right way to create a bonsai. Is that correct?
There are guidelines.
Okay.
These guidelines are general. In other words, the lower third of your trunk of your plant is normally clean or has no branches. So in other words, that means your first branch starts at about right at the lower third, and the other branches go up. And then you say that there's a branch on the left side, there's a branch on the right side. And you can see these airplane views of the branches that are on a bonsai, and this will give you an idea. They're not all on one side unless it's a windswept, so that it looks balanced. Those are basic guidelines. But sometimes the plants don't cooperate, so you can't. That's what I'm trying to say. But you do with what you got. and that's going to pay off in the end, as Jiminy Cricket I think said years ago. It's important that you use these as guidelines only, but enjoy it, whatever it is.
Okay, okay. Well, one of the things that I always marveled at about the trees is the tiny leaves on them, and I was wondering, just while we're talking generally about bonsai, how do you get the leaves so small, or is it specifically a species um, uh, thing? Do you have to pick the right species?
Yes
Okay.
and no.
Oh.
There are species that you can get or that you can acquire, like a sweet gum as an example. There are varieties of sweet gum that have smaller leaves. And if you defoliate these leaves at a certain time, the leaves will come back in about 20% smaller. And then you do it again, they'll be 20% smaller. With ficus, rubber trees. When we go to China and see all of the millions of plants, these plants have been completely defoliated twice a year to bring the leaves in smaller. Normally it's in April and October. And the leaves then come in extremely small. Now, well, easy way to do it is to pick a plant that's got smaller leaves. There can be extremes, though, on that, where you get leaves that are so small that they don't even look natural. The Japanese maple there are varieties that have huge leaves as big as your hand. There are Japanese maples that have leaves that are like your thumbnail. Personally, I like just the plain Acer palmatum, the red or green, which is what we have. We do have some of the other varieties, but they are very beautiful, and by containerizing them, you're going to make the leaves smaller. And we do defoliate in the springtime, and the new leaves, when they do come in, they are smaller. Now, elm trees, as an example. The old American elm, the leaf is as big as your hand. I have some like that in the yard. Rare varieties, variegated forms. However, there are so many varieties of elm trees that are tiny, tiny leaves that are very beautiful. And we have one that is extremely unusual. It's called the Hokkaido elm, which the leaf is about as big as a pinhead. Well, it's so small that it's a novelty plant. It is not really too much of a bonsai as such. So again, what I said previously, some are so small that they're really not much of a bonsai, the leaf size. So you get maples, you get pyracantha, you get Japanese azaleas. All of those have fairly small leaves. And those plants you pick, cotoneaster is an example, barberry is an example, boxwood. When you go to a nursery and pick these babies, you try to pick the ones that have the smaller leaves, not something like a huge sweet gum leaf or a big oak leaf. As an example, oak trees are extremely difficult to do because their leaves are so big that it's virtually impossible to make it into a bonsai because they're all just kind of string bean and big leaves. It's difficult unless you find an old plant like on a farm someplace on fence post areas that has been chewed up by the cows for a number of years, and then they'll have a heavy trunk. But yes, to make it easier, pick a small leaf variety. And you can walk up and down the nurseries in your area and see all of these wonderful plants that would just be so much fun to have. You want one of each. You want to have them all to play with.
Right. Exactly. Well, I know that plants make the sugars that they live on, through photosynthesis in the leaves. So if you defoliate the plant, how does it survive?
Well, that's only for a short period of time. 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and the leaves will all be out again.
Okay.
In other words, you wouldn't do that if the plant was sick or weak. So what you would do is, like a ficus, they're very strong. You just defoliate. Within a week or 2 weeks, you're going to have leaves again. The same way with the maples. You take all those leaves off and the plant is extremely strong. The new leaves come back like nothing. They just come back.
Wow, okay.
There's no problem with that.
Okay. Okay. What do you think? I mean, because bonsai are for the most part, outdoor plants. They're trees that are outdoors. So, what kind of environment do you grow them in? Or where should they be located? Because I know in the summer, like for instance, Japanese maples, the leaves all turn crispy. So how do you keep that from happening? I guess the question is really, what's the right environment for bonsai?
The Japanese type bonsai should be outside. Unfortunately, one of the most popular varieties is the juniper, the dwarf Japanese juniper, garden juniper. It's really an outdoor plant. Now, you can see them all the way up into Illinois, Indiana, as landscape plants. In fact, the first plants to come in were back in 1880 with the nursery in Illinois that brought them in. And they've just been propagated like crazy since then. It's a beautiful little plant, but they're outdoor. So in parts of Minnesota, Wisconsin, where it is so cold, they're going to have to start worrying in September, October, where to protect these plants. Well, they have a way of doing that. In Texas, on the few days that it's really freezing down into 32 or below, then we protect them. But a Japanese type plant needs to be outside. Now, you can put it out in full sun, but what does that mean? That means you got to water it like crazy. Now, what does that mean? 2 times, 3 times a day you may need to water. And that's too much for most people. The most that would be comfortable for most people is in the morning before they go to work and in the evening when they come back. But you need to be a very loyal bonsai hobbyist to even get that much done and have all the chores of family life too.
Right.
The best way to give your plant maximum light would be early morning, that morning up to about noontime sun, and then the afternoon sun, which is so hot and demanding, it can be there till 8 or 9 o'clock at night, would be to get the plant on the east side, and be sure you water it once a day at least. And you need to use what's called a rich soil, quote unquote rich soil, which has got a lot of peat moss in it. Now, in the wintertime, you need to protect it. Now, we're only talking about Japanese plants. Now, you're talking about the other plants that most people love to have inside. That's the sarissa, the snow rose, the bougainvillea, some azaleas, Fukian tea tree, ficus, rubber tree, those type of plants. The more light you can give them, the better it is. We used to give out a little generic instruction sheet to our customers, and we said at least 4 to 6 hours of direct sunlight per day. And what that meant, that you had to put it right on the windowsill, not close to the window, but on the windowsill, so that it would get enough light. And what happens is the plant will balance itself, even a little juniper. It may lose half of its little needles, but it will survive. Not very well, but it will survive. You do need to water it still, and we've had some customers say, well, it's so cold next to the window that the plant froze, but once it thawed out, it was still okay because it was inside. You've got to worry about hot air blowing on it and so forth. But the tropicals can be inside all year round. In fact, when we used to do the Indiana Flower Show, we had customers up there that had plants in their basement, and that they would have them there year-round, conifers like hinoki cypress. And these are extremely dense foliaged plants, and they'd keep them down there all year round under fluorescent lights. Now, if you use fluorescent lights, they need to be 12 to 18 inches above the plant and on for 18 hours a day. They can be used, but again, if you could put them outside in the summer, they'll be so much happier. They just flourish in that type of an environment.
Okay. Well, see, my biggest problem when bringing bonsai indoors is the lack of humidity. You
Yes,
know, and the
you of course can do that with two or three. Help it along with a little sprayer. We've got sprayers that mist very, very, very fine mist. You've got humidity trays. You've got nachi rocks, which are large pebbles that you can set your plant on in that humidity tray. In fact, when I worked at the greenhouse in high school, and that was 100 years ago, when I was 12 years old, we had these big, huge pans of water that we set on the heating units, and that created what little humidity we could have there in the greenhouse.
uh,
So it's the water evaporating around the plant that will help it.
so you're basically just trying to increase the humidity in the area that the tree is in, not
Yes,
throughout the
that's all
whole
you can do.
house.
It'd be wonderful if you could. In fact,
Yeah.
we do that too, but it's virtually impossible to do it to the height that you want it for the plant.
Right. Yeah, because like my ficus, they have to have high humidity. The leaves drop off and
Yes, and turn brown on the edges and so forth. Yes.
right, exactly. Well, what do you think if you're a beginner, what should your first tree be? Is there a different difficulty level with different trees? You know, like a beginner tree, which is really easy to take care of, you know, it's like you can't kill it, to up to
Well,
advanced.
yes, that's where you need to start. We don't want you to become despondent and give up and throw everything away and say, "Oh, I can't grow them." You can grow them if I can grow them. All these plants need is water and light and a little bit of care. Some of the easiest ones to grow are the tropical type, like the ficus. The dwarf pomegranate is an excellent plant, but it will defoliate in the winter, so all you've got is little sticks. But it's so cute because it's got the little flowers and the fruit, in the summertime, and just really cute. Satsuki azaleas, some of them can be brought in and kept inside in the winter. The maple, oh, it's so beautiful because this is the idea of Japan. It's like having bamboo and maples. These are the ideas of a beautiful, beautiful Japanese garden. Uh, but it is not a good indoor plant at all. However, when we were in Indiana, we had one lady that's what she grew in her big bay window were Japanese maples, and she could do it, I suppose, because it leaked so much air that it kept it cool and humid for her. This was in Indianapolis at the Indiana Flower Show at that time. Juniper is an excellent plant to start because it's so easy. But honestly, truly, it's an outdoor plant. To be successful, you need to do something real easy. We don't want you to get discouraged and say, "Oh, I can't grow bonsai." We do hear this a lot, and it's really because you've gotten busy or you didn't know exactly how to take care of it. But if you really want to be into bonsai, you need to try an easy one at first, say like the ficus,
Mm-hmm.
big tree. If you're outside and want to play, it's the azalea or the maple or the juniper. And for a beautiful little brilliant colored flower is the pomegranate. These are all excellent plants. The Fukian tea is a little finicky. It's a Chinese variety, so it's one that I wouldn't suggest for your first plant. After you get your teeth cut on one or two plants, then you could try it. The snow rose is a cute little plant to play with. We have those actually growing out in the ground here in Dallas. We're in Zone 8A, and they're able to survive our winters here, and they're blooming right now. When we go to Japan, we see them used as landscaping plants. They're just so, so, so pretty. They're just a little shrub, of course, there, but the ones we have, we pruned and trimmed, and they're really a cute little plant. They're evergreen. So any of those would be good as starters, but don't try to take a plant that is, as an example, an Ezo spruce. Try to grow that here in Texas. No, that's a no-no. Or if you were in Florida, to try to grow a Shimpaku juniper. That's a no-no because it just will not survive in that environment. It just won't. Even maples, Japanese maples, are somewhat hard to grow in Tampa, Florida, because of the high heat there, even in the wintertime.
So basically, what you can grow depends on the climate you live in.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And you said now for the Fukian tea is blooming, right?
No, snow
The
rose,
snow rose.
Cerescent snow rose.
Okay, yeah. Now is the end of September. That's when
Yes,
we're.
and it'll bloom from springtime, April, all the way up to close to freeze time here in Dallas, which will be mid-November.
Okay. Okay. So really then the way to create a bonsai tree, even if you're new at it and you're not a green thumb, would be to start with a tree that is almost foolproof.
Yes,
Okay, and you're saying a juniper, but that has to be outside, or
correct.
maybe a ficus or fig tree
Yes,
inside.
and go to your local nursery. You'll see boxwoods. That's a landscape plant, but it can be grown fairly well indoors. And it's a pretty plant because it's got a smaller leaf. So there are a number of plants that you can buy at your local nursery that you'll have fun with. Rosemary is a cute plant.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have much of a leaf is the problem. It's kind of more like a needle, but it can be bonsaied. In other words, it can be made into a bonsai. Most of the time it's into a topiary, but it can be into a bonsai. So there are a number of plants. Try the easy ones first until you get down the routine, and then you can try more difficult and more difficult plants. Don't jump in the hard ones at first,
Okay.
because you'll be disappointed.
Okay. Well, thanks for that. That helps. I wanted to switch gears a little bit because I had heard you talk about, and it sounds like a mythical village. You talked about a bonsai village in Japan where great bonsai masters have shops. And I get this, impression that you walk down this small little street and there's all these little shops where all these beautiful bonsai are. Is that true? And where is it?
It's in Omiya. It's a short distance outside by train, short distance out of Tokyo. And what it is like a neighborhood. They're not shops as such. It's not that kind of a commercial thing. Uh, there is a name usually above the gate of whose bonsai home this is, like Mr. Muranaka, and he has quite a few acres of masterpieces. And you go in, and on the left-hand side, you'll see he's got 2 rooms where he teaches classes. Right in front of you is kind of like a entry or a welcoming area where he shows all of his books and some special plants that they're working on. When we were there in January, we saw all the plants for kokufu, and my goodness, these were just unbelievable. The camellias were in bloom. They were 4 and 5 feet high, just unbelievably shaped. Spruces, all of these ones that you see in the picture books. And in the area behind there are all of the big, huge plants that are the masterpieces from all over Japan. He's the babysitter for most of these plants. In other words, the Prime Minister of Japan and all of the big government officials will leave the plants with him, and then when they have some party or some such, then the plants will then be taken to their place and displayed and then brought back over there. So he takes care of them. He babysits the plants. Then you walk down the street, and here's another man that specializes in camellias. And all you see are these absolutely beautiful camellias, bonsai camellias. And then the next one can be azaleas. And this is what it's like. I'd classify it as a neighborhood. Uh, there are these scattered throughout another area north of Tokyo, but Omiya is the number one place for the best of the best of bonsai and the bonsai masters. When you go north of Tokyo, you'll see the commercial places, and these will have, of course, many different plants and much less expensive, because the stuff you see in Omiya is priceless. They may be $500,000,
Wow.
$1 million. The picture that we have of our logo, which we got from Mr. Muranaka, was over $500,000, and that was 14 years ago.
Wow.
So they're just unbelievably beautiful. They look like a picture, like an artist would have painted them, because they're too perfect.
Wow. So that's you want to know what you're doing before you buy something that could die that's $500,000, right?
I would hope so.
Yeah.
If you can afford $500,000, you better have somebody to take care of it for you.
Right. Wow.
Hopefully you can have your own bonsai man.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and there's another story you told me one time that there's a gentleman who was basically setting the bonsai world on its ear because he was like a rebel. He was doing things differently, and he wasn't accepted in the bonsai village. And
Yes.
who is the guy, and what was so different about what he was doing?
Komura. Chainsaw Komura was his name. This is what the Japanese people had called him, because he would get these very huge collected plants, junipers, so forth, and use a chainsaw to whack at them. And so they sarcastically called him Chainsaw Komura. He has become more famous. Whether he's been accepted into the Omiya clan or not, I'm not sure yet. Maybe because of old age he has been, but he was looked down upon because his ideas were so drastic in comparison to the ideas that most bonsai people had in Omiya, and they wouldn't even let him buy a house or rent a house in that particular area.
Oh, that's interesting.